father of English history, Monk. Who was he, and why is he important? And what was his greatest work, and how has it affected our modern world today? Well, in this video, we're going to take a look at that. Hi, I'm from a historical reenactment group. We bring history to life through our reenactments and educational videos. His original name was probably something like Edwin or Ethelstan, but when he entered the church, he took the name of John. So young Monk, whose writing skills were already well known, was selected to be one of the students at this school. And later in his writings, he will sometimes refer to himself by that name. The school lasted for 6 years, after which many of these students went on to become monks and write many of the earliest historical works of England. And he wrote a letter talking about his teacher and his works. Let me read it to you. My most learned Lord and Father, you are justly called the second Bede, because in your own lifetime you have compiled from ancient and venerable volumes the history of the English, that is to say the deeds of our forefathers from the beginning of the world up to the conquest of William. We do, however, have a copy of a copy, and in that copy is where we get the quote that gives us the name of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. So let me read it to you. Then the sons of the noble Ella, king of Northumbria, that is to say, Aelauger and Ealdred, each one after the other, held the rule of the kingdom. If he hadn't taken the time to write down all of these events, then we would have had a very hard time figuring out who did what and when they did it. It is one of the most important sources we have, and it helps us understand how the English people developed into the nation we know today. Luckily, though, he did take the time to write it down, and we can thank him for that. He was the father of English history, and he wrote the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is one of the most important books in English history. Without his work, we would know very little about early England. So we can thank him for that. And in their time, the province of Northumbria was harassed by the attacks of the Danes. And in those days, a book was written in that province in which the record of these occurrences was preserved. And that book was called the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. So we see here that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle was a book that was written in Northumbria in the 9th century. You have shown the world what a thing is history, what poetry, what eloquence. And each scribe added their own little touches to it. It was actually a collection of multiple books. There was the Northumbrian Chronicle, which we just read from. Then there was the West Saxon Chronicle, which started with Alfred the Great and told the history of Wessex. And then there was the Worcester Chronicle, which was basically a continuation of the West Saxon Chronicle. And finally, there was the Style, which was a continuation of the Northumbrian Chronicle. We also see here the word chronicle. Chronicle means a record of occurrences. So this was a record of occurrences in England from the beginning of time up until 1066. For before your time, these three styles were unknown in our language. We can even say that you first taught our native tongue to speak, and without these chronicles, we would have a huge gap in our knowledge of early English history. Thanks to the work of Monk and the other scribes, we can see the history of the English people from the 6th century all the way up to 1066. We can see how kingdoms rose and fell. We can see how battles were fought and who fought in them. We can see how laws were made and who made them. And we can see how the English people grew from a small collection of tribes to a powerful kingdom. So this other monk refers to Monk as the second Bede, saying that he had done for the English people what Bede had done, which is creating an English literature and teaching the English people how to write. But Monk eventually returned home to the Abbey of St. Albans and began his most famous work. They had stories, legends, and chronicles, but nothing organized, nothing complete. All they had was the work of a guy named Bede, who was a monk/scholar who wrote in the 8th century. Well, the book that he wrote was titled Historia Anglorum, or History of the Angles, but it was more specifically known as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. As we mentioned earlier, Bede wrote up to the year 650 AD, so he left a huge gap for someone to come along and fill in. So Monk probably decided to start with the creation of the world, and then go all the way up to the Norman conquest in 1066. He probably wanted to show the rise and fall of kings, the battles and wars, and all the events that happened between the year 650 and 1066. Now, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle wasn't one single book, but rather multiple manuscripts that were written over a period of about 200 years, starting around 890 AD and ending around 1150 A. These manuscripts were created in different monasteries and were basically rewritten each time, copying down the previous version with additions and corrections. And while Bede's work was great, it stopped around the year 650 AD, leaving almost 400 years of English history completely blank. This is where Monk came in. While at the Abbey, he would have been educated in the classics, not only Greek and Roman, but also Christian theology. He would have studied philosophy, poetry, rhetoric, and history. So make sure to like and subscribe if you want to learn more about history with us. So who was the father of English history? It was Monk, one of the most important writers in the development of England. Monk was born around 1050 AD in the town of Dorchester, located in the county of Dorset in Wessex. Now we don't know much about his childhood, but what we do know is that he came from a noble family. In fact, his father was an advisor to King Edward the Confessor, the King of England at the time. When Monk was still young, he entered the monastery at the Abbey of St. Albans and was educated there. In 1079, shortly before Christmas, a royal mandate signed by William the Conqueror ordered all monasteries to send their best scholars to a new school being established at the Abbey of St. Swithin in Winchester. At this point in time, although the English had been converted to Christianity over 300 years before, they really didn't have a written history. As we said earlier, the school at Winchester was founded by William the Conqueror, and the purpose of this school was to create a new generation of English scholars. Now we know of this work mostly because of another monk, one who was a student of Monk. So what was this book that he created? What was this history of the English people that he wrote? It's as very possible that Monk at the Abbey of St. Albans created the first manuscript, and he may have used Bede's work as a template. But as we said earlier, we don't have any original copies of Monk's history. And while it may have started out as a single manuscript by Monk, by this point, it looks like it has been copied into multiple places. Now, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle wasn't just a book. So while we don't have a copy of Monk's original work, we do have copies of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which may have started as Monk's work. In a way, we can say that England wouldn't be where it is today without the work of Monk. Today, we use the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle as a primary source when studying early England. So who was Monk? Well, he was a monk and a historian who lived in the 11th century. And now you know a little bit about one of the most important figures in English history. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an upload. And as always, thanks for watching.